FromSoftware are one of my favourite developers in video game history, and their games pretty much re-sparked my interest in gaming in my 20s after having some time off. I've followed and played all their games since my first and wanted to try my hand at the incredibly intimidating task of ranking them in order of personal preference. To give a brief personal history, the first in the series I played was Dark Souls 2, after picking it up at the store when they didn't have Dark Souls 1. After that, I finally played the first game, followed by Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Demon's Souls, and finally, most recently, Sekiro. They are the 6 games I'm going to be ranking. I'm so sorry, Deracine? I don't know, whatever. Here's a few points I need to make clear before we blast off. Number 1, there'll be spoilers for every game I just mentioned. Number 2, this list is highly personal and is based on my experiences with each game. If you disagree, that's perfectly fine. Number 3, I genuinely love all 6 of these games, so it was only with great difficulty that I finally decided on the order of this list. Finally, I've never played any of these games online, so that aspect of the game doesn't factor in for me. Without further ado, let's roll. Number 6, Dark Souls 2. They say with a lot of things in life, you never forget your first. And for me personally, Dark Souls 2 was the first FromSoft game I had the pleasure of playing. If I'm being 100% honest, I had a hard time deciding whether this or its immediate predecessor would occupy this bottom spot on the list. In reality, I like them about the same. Regarding Dark Souls 2, I'll start by saying I really enjoyed the emphasis on trying to discover the origin or the cure for the undead curse that plagues the world. Ultimately, the futility of this quest gave the game a philosophical feel that was sometimes lacking in the grander scope of the original. Meeting King Vendrick for the first time was a spine-tinglingly good moment of storytelling genius. This mighty king, who we've spent all game hearing about and all game questing to locate, and he's just a husk like everybody else. Dark Souls 1 had a lot of dark and depressing moments in it, but I'm not sure it had any moments that can top King Vendrick. The atmosphere of the game felt spot on too. In particular, Majula remains the most underrated hub area in Soulsborne history. There's an ambiguity in this area that serves as an encapsulation of the entire Dark Souls experience. Is the music hopeful or mournful? Is the sun rising or setting? Is this ragtag community that's forming around Majula set to follow the same fate of every other locale in the game, or is there something different and special about them? I also appreciated the fact that Dark Souls 2 offered a robustly different experience in New Game Plus, a cool little extra that I really wish made a return in other games. By slightly altering enemy placements, Dark Souls 2 became instantly the most replayable of all FromSoft's games. I was genuinely a bit upset when I found out Dark Souls 1 was lacking this feature. At the heart of Dark Souls 2 though are the slightly tweaked combat mechanics that add a few more options to the mix, such as dual wielding, that make it a monster killing simulator par excellence. I think Dark Souls 2 took a lot of risks and made a lot of design choices that more grizzled Dark Souls fans didn't appreciate, but a newbie like me kinda did. The world design wasn't as interconnected as previous games, but it still felt tight and kind of more video gamey than previous installments, like traversing more brutally difficult Legend of Zelda dungeons. Having said all of that, I do accept and acknowledge some of the common criticisms of the game. For starters, the internal geography makes no sense, though in hindsight, if you suspend your disbelief, it has to be acknowledged Dark Souls 2 probably has the widest variety of areas in terms of aesthetics. Still, an awful lot of ideas are ported over from the first game, with the gutter basically being Blighttown 2.0, and some of the original areas are dire too. Some areas look drab and ugly, and others are designed in a way to be frustrating rather than challenging. The frigid outskirts? I'm looking at you. I think ultimately though, Dark Souls 2's best idea was to pay very little heed story-wise to the first game. It feels so distinct and different. I kinda respect that. I guess Dark Souls 2 kinda feels like Halloween 3. It's part of the series almost by name alone. I was kind of ready and willing for each installment of the Dark Souls series to be so bizarrely different from one another that they don't really bear much resemblance at all. Thank you, Dark Souls 2, for acting as my gateway drug to Dark Souls. Number 5. Dark Souls. This is where things get controversial. The original Dark Souls was, thanks perhaps to its multi-platform release, the game that truly put FromSoftware on the map. It broke so many pre-established rules that governed how to make a blockbuster hit game. With thick, obtuse lore, a very high difficulty threshold, and virtually no hand-holding at all, playing Dark Souls felt like a real challenge to be conquered. A very intimidating experience, but one that felt incredibly rewarding to traverse successfully. Dark Souls cemented the formula that Demon's Souls concocted. There are so many positive things that can be said about Dark Souls. For starters, the maze-like, interconnected level design makes it feel like one of the most carefully and lovingly designed video game worlds of all time. The emphasis on shortcuts and the relative freedom to explore stands out as something FromSoft have never quite been able to best. The boss battles, some of which are etched into the Dark Souls community's brain forever, gave us unforgettably epic clashes. The battles against the Belfry Gargoyles, or Ornstein and Smough, or Sif and Gwyn all pushed the envelope in terms of difficulty, challenge, and also in some cases, emotional resonance. Dark Souls also gave a lot of space to let its NPCs shine. Never shoved down the players' throats, NPC storylines are easily missed but add a thick layer of depressing depth to the experience. The roster of NPCs has frankly never been bested either. Who can ever forget the likes of Solaire or Sigmire? Why did I rank the game that arguably got the ball rolling for FromSoftware as my 4th favourite then? Well, Dark Souls does have some big and very glaring faults. I'd argue that the wheels come off the game a little bit after the Lord Vessel has been retrieved. None of the areas or bosses that follow this pivotal moment in the story stand out compared to what's come before. After the brilliance of Undeadburg, the grueling fight through Blighttown and the heady battle against Ornstein and Smough, the game loses a lot of its momentum. The last third of the game feels rushed and unfinished, and Lost Izalith, which had the potential visually to be one of the more interesting areas of the game, is a complete disaster. The area, and the Witch of Izalith boss fight, is my least favourite section in the entire series. It's just plain bad. The Tomb of the Giants also kinda sucks, and is challenging in that unfair, frustrating kind of way. To put it as simply as possible, Dark Souls possesses a number of areas that I dread having to traverse, and that's something I can't say for the 4 games that lie ahead. It is ultimately a flawed game, but it does so much right that it's so easy to forgive these flaws and celebrate Dark Souls as one of the best games ever. Number 4. Demon's Souls. The game that started it all, and the game that will be getting a PS5 remake pretty soon. I didn't personally play Demon's Souls on release. In fact, it was the 5th FromSoft game I played, so understandably after more polished experiences, I found it a little bit archaic and rough around the edges. Demon's Souls deserves its due for being a real frontrunner for FromSoft's success. In retrospect, it made a lot of very bold design and mechanical choices that turned out to be defining features of FromSoft's games. The high level of difficulty, the incredibly dark and depressing atmosphere, the tough boss fights, it was all pioneered here. Demon's Souls deserves a lot of credit, but the truth is I think the game still holds up pretty well to modern standards. I think the number one quality for me in Demon's Souls is the atmosphere and immersion of the game's areas. Stonefang Tunnel is a great example of just how well designed Demon's Souls feels. The miners mindlessly chipping away at the rocks, the monsters that appear further in the tunnel like Balrogs that have been unearthed, the way you use the mining machinery to get around. The story and the background of all the areas is baked into the experience. You learn about the geography and history of the world through your experience in it. I know later games did this kind of thing too, but there's something really ingenious about the way it's done here, because this game is the pioneer after all. For what it's worth, I think the muted, washed out colours and blockier graphics were probably the result of technical limitations at the time, but I actually think they add to the unique personality the game still has. Although more recently made games blow Demon's Souls away graphically, there is a stylized distinctness here that I feel is aging more gracefully than Dark Souls 1 or 2. The one thing that is a real shame about Demon's Souls is the commonly held belief that it's simply a practice run for Dark Souls, a kind of predecessor that brings nothing of its own to the table. While Dark Souls did improve upon a lot of Demon's Souls ideas, there's a kind of punk rock attitude in Demon's Souls that literally none of the other Soulsborne games have. So many unconventional ideas were thrown into the mix. This has to be one of the most daring games ever designed. Not all of the ideas stuck. Some of the boss fights, for example, feel overly gimmicky. But later games became a little bit too codified and actually became way less experimental. I will say one other thing I don't like, and it's pretty major. The name, Demon's Souls. It sounds awkward, and for years I thought it was simply Demon's Souls, which rolls off the tongue a little smoother, unless you're some sort of snake. Number 3, rather fittingly, Dark Souls 3. The third and final installment in the Dark Souls trilogy is in some ways FromSoft's greatest game. Visually, it has some of the most lavish and breathtaking areas in Soulsborne history. The fantastical reveal of the snowy Irithyll springs to mind, for example, as a beautiful set piece. And it has some of the most creative and interesting enemies and bosses of the entire series. The Nameless King, Slave Knight Gale, Pontiff Sullivan, and the Abyss Watchers all spring to mind as bosses that are amazingly fun to face thanks to a mix of their interesting fighting styles and the epic, cinematic scope of the battles. To boot, I was pretty intrigued with the direction the team decided to take the story, staging this finale an untold amount of time in the future, with the ambitious goal of putting the Dark Souls story to rest for good. Although the story kind of canonizes one particular ending of Dark Souls 1 and kind of ignores Dark Souls 2, the idea of a succession of ever weaker kindlers of the First Flame gives the game an impressive and immense sense of scale and history that I couldn't wait to see what this world that existed centuries after Gwyn's passing could possibly look like. Mechanically and thematically, the game feels like a Dark Souls experience that's been deeply influenced by Bloodborne. The combat has a noted faster and more visceral pace. There are lots of enemies that are gigantic, but at the same time deathly fast and mobile, which is very reminiscent of Bloodborne. Mobs of enemies now patrol around areas just like in Yharnam, but that's a massive improvement over waiting for you to arrive like stone statues, as in Undeadburg in Dark Souls 1. All of these Bloodborne-tinged tweaks to the Dark Souls formula are positive changes and make the combat and the game overall feel like a tighter, more well-oiled experience. I think that with the benefit of hindsight and experience, FromSoft were able to distill all of the best elements of all their previous games into Dark Souls 3 to make it a smooth ride from start to finish. The level design, the combat, the customization options, the variety of enemies, it's all here and it's executed better than ever before. It's a freshly shined and waxed Dark Souls experience. The only issue is Dark Souls 3 suffers simply by being the third game in a massively successful series. Beyond the story, there's nothing particularly new or interesting here to sink one's teeth into. Although some areas and bosses are very original, there are more that feel like retreads. The same old poisonous swamps, medieval castles, and archival libraries that we've seen time and again are all present here, and the game occasionally feels like it's Dark Souls on autopilot. Too many areas of Lothric, starting with the very first area, the High Wall of Lothric, feel somewhat anonymous because they've essentially been done before and sometimes been done better. Some people have complained of the relative ease of Dark Souls 3 compared to earlier installments, but I feel these complaints come from seasoned veterans who almost know exactly what challenges are coming up. A lot of these sense of surprise and experimentation with interesting boss designs and level gimmicks has been pretty much completely abandoned. In my opinion, Dark Souls 3 has to be the definitive full stop to the Dark Souls series, lest the shine truly wear off. Having said that, I think Dark Souls 3 does an admirable job as the series' send-off game. The DLC in particular attempts and kind of succeeds at tying the lore of the Dark Souls universe together in about as neat a bow as was realistically possible for a series with so many intentional loose ends. Number 2. Sekiro. Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro, FromSoft's most recent game as of 2020, represented a dramatic departure from all of the company's previous efforts. At face value, this is still a Soulsborne game. It's an experience that focuses heavily on combat, on gruelingly difficult boss fights, and on exploration to find all the best loot and hidden areas. That's where the comparisons end, however. The game has a sense of openness that the previous games did not, owing to the expansive nature of the levels, that makes Sekiro feel like a breath of fresh air and was designed to complement the game's grappling hook mechanic really well. It's fun to see Wolf, the protagonist, grapple hook and swing his way across ancient Japanese temples with Batman-like grace. I wouldn't describe Sekiro as open world by any stretch of the imagination, but I love the relative freedom the game offers and found myself deviating away from the supposed proper path of stages to explore all the nooks and crannies, and loving that feeling. The other major change, the addition of stealth mechanics, adds a totally different dimension that all of the FromSoft games are lacking. Hacking and slashing through hordes of enemies is now even more dangerous than ever, and in Sekiro's case, get good means being a jack of all trades. Sometimes the best solution involves sneaking around and clearing out an area in stealth mode, Solid Snake style. And sometimes the best solution is to get your hands dirty and test your katana wielding skills. What Sekiro lacks in terms of customization options, because you only get one sword, it makes up for via its upgrade system. Sure, it's a little more restrictive and video gamey, and falls in line with mainstream hits like God of War, but the continually expanding repertoire of skills and abilities Wolf can unlock as the game progresses ensures there's always something new to try out and master. I think the combat in Sekiro is much deeper and as a result much more satisfying than any of the previous games. There is an emphasis on precision parrying that makes even the easiest dork in the game a challenge at first, and has warranted some to deem this a rhythm game. Brute forcing bosses with offense is still an option, but in most cases taking the time to strategize and customize your weapon and item loadouts to exploit each enemy and boss's weakness is the most important thing you can do. If the Souls series was a rebellion against a lot of conventional gaming tropes, Sekiro actually feels like a meta-rebellion against a lot of FromSoftware tropes. Playing the game the way you played Dark Souls 3 is a recipe for disaster. As you might be able to tell, I personally love the combination of grapple hooking around, using stealth every now and then, and trying to master the tricky combat system. To pay the game one more major compliment, I adore the way Japanese Shinto and Buddhist folklore has been interwoven into the fabric of the story and the characters' dialogue. It's really delightful. The item descriptions help to add to the lore too, as always. I'll also mention that much of the Japanese scenery, the mountains, the forests, the castles and temples are stunningly beautiful, but I guess there is something of a lack of visual variety and enemy variety compared to other games. I will admit that sometimes I think the tough, restrictive, parry-heavy combat and the emphasis on stealth is a combo that doesn't always complement the difficult, repetitive nature of FromSoft games, and this is why I rank the game in second place. FromSoft games typically require a certain level of trial and error to best, particularly the boss fights, but I personally found it demoralizing, sometimes having to repeat the same 10-minute stealth segments again and again, or risk being mobbed by a cavalcade of enemies mid-boss fight. Sekiro is still a great game. I can appreciate and understand why it alienated a lot of Soulsborne players, but I would actually love to see FromSoftware continue to push the envelope and put their stamp on a variety of different game styles in the future, and continue to deviate away from the Dark Souls model. And number 1, Bloodborne. The undisputed champion of FromSoft's portfolio stands not just as the best FromSoft game of all time, but one of the best games of all time full stop. Taking everything that made Dark Souls great but improving on almost every facet of the game while injecting it with some new ideas was what Bloodborne was all about. The story and atmosphere were as bleak as ever, but instead of fantasy, Bloodborne drags us into a more gothic and then later Lovecraftian direction. And the game looks great. The city of Yharnam, where the game is set, is like an admixture of Victorian London and medieval Prague. It looks like a giant set the film crew of a 1960s Hammer horror movie would create. Huge viaducts and cathedral-like structures tower over the dark, smoggy streets that are being patrolled by Cockney hunters, werewolves, and other apparitions of the night. The sheer creative variety of enemies and bosses helps the game remain fresh from start to finish. Oh, I can't just skip over the bosses like that. That perfect symbiosis between challenge, enjoyment, and story relevance is on full display with many of the strongest bosses here. I think Bloodborne also struck the best balance between human-sized and monstrously large bosses. Father Gascoigne, or Gaza as I like to call him, the game's first real challenge, and Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower represent to me the best two examples of human-sized combatants in Soulsborne history, while the more beastly ghoulies like the Cthulhu cosplayer Abritus and Ludwig are ever so memorable in their own right. With the new setting came a new combat system too. Bloodborne has a much smaller array of weapons, and virtually no armour or defensive options to speak of, but this is because the emphasis on Bloodborne's combat is on speed and fluidity. The pivotal importance placed on parrying with one's 19th century looking firearm and remaining aggressive to regain any lost health via offense are the two small innovations that lead to Bloodborne feeling like a very fast, very kinetic, and very fun game to play through. Anything slow and plodding about previous games' combat has been replaced with something lightning quick, and it's a sheer joy to cut through enemies. There's no more waiting around for openings, there's no more long-range options, you have to get stuck in, and I love it. Everyone has their own opinion on the best system of healing throughout the games, it's something I've not touched on in this video, but having quickly consumed mini health boosters in the form of blood vials worked perfectly well here in my opinion too, and helped to maintain that sense of speediness even when healing up. Maybe Lovecraftian style storytelling isn't for everyone, but as a fan of that genre of fiction, Lovecraftian themes haven't been executed this well in any other game, or movie or TV show, or anywhere else for that matter, in my opinion. The slow, creeping realization that there are larger cosmic forces at work in the world of Bloodborne keeps the pacing tight, and kept me guessing as to what horrors could possibly be coming up next. I was desperate to talk to every NPC to gain as much insight as possible to explore every nook and cranny of Yharnam for fear of missing out on little tidbits of lore or story or clues as to what the heck was going on. I think my favourite moment in the game was finding one of the miniature celestial emissaries in the wooded area. It was just such a weird revelation and it completely changed the tone of the game. It's something that will always stick with me. It was a real WTF moment. The only thing about the game I personally didn't like is the Chalice dungeon. I understand the appeal of including a roguelike element in the game, but the dungeons were way too samey for my liking. The same architecture, the same atmosphere over and over again. And of course they contain some of the most frustrating bosses ever concocted. But thankfully, the dungeons are optional, so they can safely be ignored, unless you want that platinum trophy that is. I'll end this mini-review by making a sweeping comment addressing the criticisms critic Matt Mitosis made about Bloodborne, feeling like an overly watered-down Soulsborne experience. I'll say that for me, it feels like the fat of other games has been trimmed, making Bloodborne a leaner product. I don't miss anything that's been dropped or changed from the previous games, except maybe DS2's New Game Plus. And the relative repetitiveness of the gameplay didn't bug me at all, perhaps because I was so deeply invested in the atmosphere and immersive nature of the unfolding narrative. Bloodborne is an easy 10 out of 10 game for me, and my personal favourite FromSoftware game of all time. And there we have it. I'm always up for healthy discussion, so please share your opinions in the comments and let me know which games you feel I rank too highly, or conversely, which games you feel I rank too low. I want to know your favourite and least favourite games. I mean, this is all just personal opinions, right? And with that, I think I'm off to try the Kingsfield series. Wish me luck.